Hi everyone, and welcome to the Investing in Talent and Impact panel. And I now turn you over to Tayyib, who is the senior principal at Little Giant Creative, who will be the moderator for this panel.
Thank you so much. Everyone, these are two people that I know professionally, but are near and dear to my heart personally. Mark and Ty, at different stages of my career, are people who have talked me off the ledge or encouraged me to, jump into waters that were very fruitful. And I know Ty from when she was a singer, aspiring singer in Philadelphia, and we used to go to the Black Lily together. And I like to joke that we used to help John Legend get in the clubs. Uh,
This
and
is true. This is very true.
and Mark Byers, if you're a Philadelphian and you've even touched any part of hip hop, R&B, or just culture in general, he has probably interacted with your career or opened a door for you. So I thought since we were going to talk about Philadelphia and talk about investing in people, it was really important to bring two people who have benefited from the success and the culture of Philadelphia, but then gone on to do things in film, television, TV. Um, and I'll just start there and open it up. Can both of you feel free to jump in, talk about how
I'll give
you
it to
got.
Ty.
So I'll go to Ty. Can you talk a little bit about your origin story and how you got from Center City, Society Hill, to where you are with that fancy bling over your shoulder? That I think is an Emmy.
It's an Emmy. Yep. I made it to California. Yeah, I grew up in Philly. My dad was from Lithuania, and there was a Lithuanian community that had kind of fled Russian occupation and set up in Pennsylvania. I think Chicago and Pennsylvania had big Lithuanian communities. So that's where my grandparents and my dad ended up. And my mom's from across the river in South Jersey. They met in college, and I was just a Philly kid, latchkey kid, went to Quaker school in the suburbs, grew up in the city. At that point, I was born in 1975. So, the 70s and the 80s in Philly, a lot of people fled the city. And being a city kid who went to like Friend Central out on Main Line there were only like 10 of us. And we all would take the subway and the bus together. We all knew each other and we'd wait at, the Overbrook station together. I remember being in like fifth and sixth grade and taking public transportation in SEPTA. But, there were other kids that were older than me on the public transportation that would look out for me. But, very independent, just loved being in the city. And then when I'd stay at my friend's house in the suburbs, because my mom didn't drive, I would take, the train out to visit Lauren Albert and stay at her house. And I was like, this is the nicest house. Like everything was just, so I was always kind of like, checking out different spaces and, owning my identity as a city kid. And then when I got older, I went to Penn undergrad because my mom was a professor of nursing there. So I got a free ride to Penn. And then when I graduated Penn, I worked in the Northern Empowerment Zone of Philadelphia at a place called Monsoon Micro Studios out on 9th and Girard before that area was hip. And, we were making Wu-Tang Clan videos and commercials and early .com sites for places.
That's
and
right.
There was nothing out there. There was one Chinese food restaurant with bulletproof glass where we could get lunch. But other than that, like it was just really empty. There was a giant field around us, old factories that were abandoned, and we were doing really cool creative stuff. And I think we got tax breaks. So the empowerment zones are kind of like the old version of what opportunity zones are. And that was my post-Penn Ivy League, experience, making $23,000 a year, being the only woman in this creative shop running.
Rich.
I was sort of the senior account executive. I was the one who would like handle the clients. I'll never forget the first week of my job. I'm thinking like, this is just the most exciting creative place I've ever been. I chose not to go to New York and do the consulting gigs. The first week of my job, I get in there and Charlie Zarati, my boss at the time, there were like 15 people in the company. He's like, let's all go to lunch. And we start walking, and we get down to this place and we walk in and it's Delilah's Den, which is a strip club. And I was like, okay, back then, I was just like, okay, I can do this. This is cool. But Philly was my hometown. I felt like the mayor. I mean, I went to grad school there. I didn't leave Philly till I was 28, and I finally got a job on the West Coast, which is kind of where I always thought I should be, where I wanted to be. But I still think of Philadelphia as my home. All my best friends are there. My mom still lives there. And I go back as often as I can because I'm on the board of the Quattrone Center for Justice at Penn Law now. So we do a lot of criminal justice work. I care so much about the city. I want to see it thrive. And, we get very involved in local elections and making sure that we got, the right things happening there. But yeah, that's kind of, I mean, I ended up in music management, film and TV production and entertainment and all these things, which California is really a good place to be for that. But a lot of the content we create even is, Philly based. I mean, we've got a doc film about the Move bombing that happened that is, coming out. And so, we think about, we film a lot of things back there. We try to think about ways to kind of stay very connected because all my partners are from Philly too. And they all live out here now. But we've known each other. All the people I work with the most, John Legend, Mike Jackson, Mike and I grew up. He went to the Quaker school that I went to. And John Legend and I met at Penn. And we sang in a jazz and blues a cappella group. So it's nice to have all your main core people go back to when you were a kid and one city that kind of made you who you are.
So I want to pivot.
Oh, Tayyib, I can't hear you.
Oh,
are you muted? Marc,
can you hear me?
I can hear. I hear Tayyib.
Oh,
Okay.
I can't hear anybody else now.
So
Weird.
I want to come back to some of the points you touched on, but I want to pivot. And Marc, could you tell me a little bit about your origin story coming from Mount Airy to now you're also in LA? Came to I'll say became an expat in recent history, and I'm trying to pull you home. But give us
home somehow or another.
That is true. So can you give us the over under of how you came to this place?
Yeah, it's funny. Like my uncle was a musician, and he played with McFadden and Whitehead. He played with Gamble and Huff and records and touring and stuff like that. But I had Piece of a Dream across the driveway from me. I would hear them rehearsing every day. I walked past Patty LaBelle's house every day going to school. And then ended up in sports and other stuff, and ended up in the kind of moving in the wrong direction. But more importantly, like what Mount Airy gave me was like a supreme array of entrepreneurs, because everyone in the neighborhood, like up and down Stanton Avenue, there were Black owners of businesses, from the bars to the beauty salons to the bakeries to barbershops, just everything, the grocery store. And it was kind of nurturing with how they dealt with you, but also, we kind of had that system where as though I could walk into a store and say that my mother wanted bread, and they would give me the bread till Friday, and I could bring it back, or I could grab some bread or a sandwich and bring the money right back. It was a different kind of trust system back then. Then I started playing sports, and then from sports it went to also to other stuff, and I ended up in music. I met Gerald Levert. And he just was like, look, man, I just really feel like, you had a personality that could actually help artists collect their money. That was his biggest thing. He was just really dwelled on how much artists didn't get paid. And this was why he was doing all his recordings in Philly. He's kind of copying off his dad and gambling them and making sure that every record that he made was made in Philadelphia. So I kind of learned a little bit from him, just talking to him and stuff like that. And, he gave me my first client. One thing led to another. I ended up, managing producers. So I started, Rodney Jerkins and a few other guys. Ended up with a job at Atlantic. And that's what made me realize that Philly was being overlooked in so many ways, not only internally, but externally, because no one in Philly actually ever came to my office when I was at Atlantic. This is about 95, 96. But what I realized is that they didn't even realize that they could. They didn't realize that it was an industry. So, taking so many meetings in with folks that wasn't from home, I decided that one of these days, if the opportunity knocks, I'm gonna quit and go back home and really start a company. So it ended up happening. Yeah. What were you saying, Ty?
So Marc, you just got a comment from Dr. Jamie Bracy Green, who's like one of my
Oh,
dearest
yeah. She's a beautiful person.
mentors and friends, one of the most brilliant innovators I know in the city. But again, this speaks to why you're the Black Godfather. I didn't even knew you two knew each other, and she mentions that she met you at Sigma Sound, and you introduced her to a
Yeah, we did a
program
tour.
that she actually partnered with the Navy.
Yeah, we did a tour. She actually I met her through Aisha Winfield. That at that time was like my assistant slash GM slash go-to person for everything, all my needs. And she actually introduced me to Dr. Bracy. So we ended up going to the studio. I took her on a tour to Sigma. But what Dr. Bracy realized is she saw all of this talent in there that wasn't professionally trained to use this equipment. So whether it was Final Cut Pro, Pro Tools, this, that, and the other, she's like, wow, look at this amazing reverse engineering that's happening. Then she started telling me about the programs that she was into for STEM and the stuff at Temple and stuff like that. But I don't know, man. My life has taken me in and out of a lot of corridors for whatever reason, only God knows. You know, I just make sure that I leave it open to learn. You know, I leave it open because someone may need a favor. They may need assistance. They may need knowledge. I may need knowledge. I may need assistance. So I try to operate in a space where as though it's unselfish so I can learn, but also teach. So, and it's been, you know, it's worked for me.
That makes me want to pivot to a question to both of you, but it was posed to you, Ty, in the chat. What makes you choose a project at Friends at Work, and how do you define social impact? And then I'll pass that afterwards to you, Mark, because you have a lot of opportunity and a lot of technicals. But at this point in your career, what makes you decide to invest in a project? Ty, we can't hear you.
Ty.
Hold on.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay,
we got you.
All right. Okay. Been having sound issues. It's so nice because I've been in the business now managing artists for over 15 years. And when I finally started my own company about 5-6 years ago, I made the decision that life's too short to take on things that you don't align with and that aren't sort of core to your being. And so it felt kind of radical at the time. I remember a lot of the sort of bigger, more well-known managers saying like, that's crazy. Why would you weave social impact into your company? Like do that on your own time. Like you're not supposed to mix those things. Like, haven't you read Milton Friedman? Maximize profit. Like it's not about, and I was like, no. I want to work in a space where, what matters more to me than like maximizing profit is like changing the world in a positive way. And it sounded very kumbaya, but it really goes back to my Quaker roots and my activist roots and what I knew growing up in Philly. And my mom was always like teaching me, all sorts of feminists. Like I was reading so much feminist books and just kind of learning how the world needs to be. And once I had a little bit of power in my own structure and I could create it, we made the decision to only manage artists and what we call impactors that are aligned with wanting to make their main purpose to give back and to do well and to use their voice to elevate good work that's happening, and not just to make themselves look good in any way, but like to elevate people, boots on the ground, grassroots work, because that's the best part about being in the sort of fame space. You've got a loud megaphone, and it allows you to sort of raise up the voices and the work of, and not just raise up the voices and the work and tell the data and all the stats that'll wake people up, but actually tell the song or the story that'll go in and crack open a heart and make someone care. And we've done it in so many different ways, and it's been really like the most rewarding part of the job. If the job was just getting hits on radio with musicians, I would have given it up so long ago, because it's just, that shit gets old, But so for me, we decide to take people on. I've taken the wrong people on before, frankly. Like I've taken on some social justice warriors that I managed that turned out to be deeply messed up womanizers, that I've taken people on that I didn't do enough due diligence. So
I saw that Jive Turkey in Toronto in the elevator, but go on.
Yeah, yeah. You know, because and there are like it's interesting because you know at least in the rock and roll world you expect like well you get what you came for, you know, but in the social justice world you got a guy wearing a phenomenal woman t-shirt and he's like meanwhile he's just using everything he can to spread STDs and you know just bad people. But so now we do background checks. We do background checks. We you know we take our time. We do like 6-month trials. But you know whether it's Charlie Puth who I manage or Raphael Sadiq from you know who's in Tony, or an up and coming pop star in her 20s, or Neil Katyal who I manage. And Neil Katyal has argued more cases to the Supreme Court than Thurgood Marshall. He stopped the citizenship question from being added to the census. He is sort of one of the foremost legal experts in the world on the Constitution. And so we manage impactors, people who need an infrastructure and advice, but don't want like a traditional slimy agent, but they need a team to help them figure out how to elevate their voice, get their book up and out. You know, with Neil, we're trying to make him into the Carl Sagan of civics, because people in the United States really don't know. We don't know, so many people don't know how government runs. They don't know how it works. And we don't really teach civics. So we're working with people like that to really, you know, just make a big difference.
So Ty, I want to pivot to Marc. And you know, same question. Like, how do you define impact in 2020? Then two, I would ask, what makes you decide to get involved in a project? And I'm gonna probe you to go a little more into your story because I didn't hear any Black Friday or all the people you've touched and influenced that have coming out of Philadelphia. You gotta give me a little more, baby.
It's funny. Well, I think at one time I think we managed 90% of Rockefeller's roster because it was all Philly. Sheesh, it's funny. Like I remember less things sometimes in the past because of you know I was always taught the next thing is important. You know. But in the process, I just feel like, you know, what I learned from, you know, making a wrong turn, I learned a lot about what not to do. And more importantly, I learned a lot about what to do, you know, and, you know, my father always helped people, you know, throughout his life. He helped young entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And just what I learned about the inner city, not necessarily being from the hood, so to speak, you know, I got a chance to really see that life was built different. Opportunities weren't the same, you know, based on the infrastructure wrapped around. And I think that's why I targeted, you know, artists that came from those communities to give the opportunity that I had. You know, I was fortunate enough to consult Amnesty International for Art for Rights, you know, and help them just with the noise. I didn't put the plan together about what they were going to do on the art side, but it was about how do you utilize the noise that music can make to impact change. So we were in New Orleans, and it was really about this guy by the name of Albert Woodfox that was on solitary confinement for 44 years, and it was something that was totally unheard of to me, you know. And I'm just like, wow, like jail for 44 years is one thing, but solitary confinement is something else. So, you know, I went out and, you know, I reached out to Lil Wayne and Manny Fresh, like every stakeholder possible in New Orleans, and they gave me a chance to take over their social media, which put us in position that we put so much noise around the activation, you know. And I'm not saying this is why it happened or not why it happened, but 2 months later, this man walked out of jail. You know, and you know, I remember like we all had a call with him. It was myself, Usher, and there's a bunch of folks that was on the call, and like this man had the energy like he had never spent one day. And all the men on the phone was crying, you know. But it's just like, I just feel like no matter what, if you're not living on purpose, you might as well not live. So, you know, I wake up to help people, you know, period. And so for some odd reason, it all comes back in return, you know. So how can you try to house all of these resources that you've gained, you know, across industries for 25 years and not share them?
So something that speaks to for me personally is growing up in environments of scarcity. I've learned that when you're in a scarce environment, people hide resources because there's not enough to share. But when you
Mm-hmm.
are in a space of abundance, it's like, hey, can I help you? Can I help you? You need something? You want a little more? You want to take a plate home? All right.
Yeah.
And if when we talk about Philadelphia, a space that has been living in an economic structural depravity intergenerationally, it creates an environment of scarcity. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring you two together, because you're deeply rooted in impact and you're also, benefited from the arts and culture scene in Philadelphia. Can you give this audience of people your thoughts on how we can bring some of that energy home, or how we can reframe how we're talking about education, or so-called soft skills that I heard in a previous panel that, in my opinion, are often coded jargon uh, to hide, you know, xenophobia, classism, and racism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean,
Tayyib.
yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen in Philly over my lifetime was initially, when I was living there, I think there was 40% abandoned housing in the city. And over the course of my 40 something years being in and out of Philly, I did see a lot of people coming back into the city, and the city kind of having this revitalization, this sort of vibrance. Parts of the city like Northern Liberties, where I lived, paying $200 a month on Franklin, now are like, it's all been, I guess you could say, developed, and a lot of people were displaced even further. But in some ways, the city sort of felt like it had a lot more opportunity and potentially new jobs. And, I think there's always these stops and starts of like, how do you create a vibrant city that allows people to thrive there and not get pushed too far out? How do you combat the sort of problems of gentrification and displacement as you have more investment come in? And it's always a delicate, very complex situation that I think we've got to be super mindful of. What we don't want is people from, like, just kind of coming into the opportunity zones that are now designated, parking their money for 10 years and then leaving. We need people who are from there, who know it, who live there, to benefit from the opportunity and the value that can come in. But when I think of Philly, I think of like one of the greatest music communities I've ever been in. It's one of the most diverse artistic places. I mean, I grew up going to the Philly Museum of Art and the Rodin Museum and the Barnes Museum, and like, just, I know so much culture and art and beauty and music because I grew up in Philly. And so many people I know never had access to that stuff. But my mom took us to everything. And she was poor from New Jersey, but she cared about her kids knowing about art and opera and the ballet and all of these things that Philly had to offer. In this tiny little space, like, Philly feels small. It's the fifth biggest city in the country, I think, but it's like you bump into people and everybody, and it's very diverse. And I miss that. I just think we need to make sure that we're getting more of the dollars back and building more infrastructure for people, and in the film and TV space and the art space, because that's really like so much of the core of who we are. Like, why hasn't Philly owned more of that, and really created more of a landscape around it? But we've, that, Mark, I don't know what you think is the best sort of specific next steps for how do we do this more? How do we make sure
Yeah.
that our hometown is thriving?
I mean, I look at it where, look, our area of the art, has actually never been addressed when it comes to Philly. You look at Atlanta, they really invest in their music and film, in their urban business, right? And I'm not saying it has to just be urban, but urban is important because a lot of impact happens from that. So, when you look at it, Philadelphia's made zero investment in the people that can actually drive revenue. They benefited from our energy for bringing resources. I mean, I bought probably everybody to Philly but Michael Jackson. You know, and I'm serious about that. Everyone we recorded with, from Justin to Chris Brown, you know, you go through the line, ushers, everyone, Mariah, you name it. We made them come to Philly to experience it. Like sometimes I told a small, you know, tale just to get people to experience Philly. Like, you want the sauce, you might have to come to Philly and come to this studio and work with these guys to get it. And people love the experience. What I've noticed, and Ty, you can attest to this, is that when we consulted like Greater Philadelphia Tourism and Marketing, the thing that was most disheartening is that there was a plan to announce some things but no relationship with the people. And I feel like where we are right now is that we have to get out of that place where, you know, the arts of Philadelphia is a transactional relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? You know, you look at the Roots Picnic. When we talked about the Roots Picnic, it had gone on for a couple years before the city even knew. But at the same time, parking, restaurants, hotels, taxes, everything across the board, 10,000 people worth of that was coming into the city every year. So it gets to the point where, you know, do we pull back and say, you know, who do we meet with? What do we do? But more importantly, I feel like Philadelphia is more comfortable with real stakeholders that care to help build from the ground up than deal with strangers. You know, so I feel like they would invite us to come back in to Philadelphia to build the community, you know, to build our storefronts, to build our housing, you know, build out everything across. But also, why allow California to reap the rewards of the grit that we learn from home? You know, how we learn how to navigate through these murky waters at home made us better travelers to get things done in other spaces. So it's just like, I feel like Philadelphia, there's a serious oversight in regards to the true talent that we are. They look at us kind of as music people, but not as business brains. But yet and still, everyone outside look at us as business brains, and they look at Philly as one of those true places where arts and culture comes from, but it doesn't have the same sentiment within.
So something you both spoke to, bunch of things, but in my own personal experience, I'm really fortunate. Like, I think the gentleman from Pew on the earlier panel said that, you know, less than 2.6 of the businesses in Philadelphia are owned by Black people, but we make up approximately 45% of the city. So I am really fortunate. I'm partners in multiple ventures. I've owned a creative agency in Little Giant Creative for 15 years with my partner, Megan Denenberg. And I don't have enough peers, right? So often I'm asked to come into rooms and talk about what do Black and brown entrepreneurs need. But the people who have dominion over the funding, dominion over the programming, not only don't have the lived experience of lifting themselves up out of poverty, but they suffer, regardless of their complexion or hue, they suffer either from class amnesia, or they suffer from a pathology of what's wrong with Black and brown children without looking at all of the known empirical and statistical data about the effects of growing up in environments of scarcity. So I really appreciate how both of you put your energy and authenticity into your work. And I would make an ask and encourage you to embold that on our larger community of people who have become expats but still travel and benefit from the brand of Philadelphia. So I think conversations like these are opportunities to build coalitions so that we can collectively across sector, whether it's those who, as I like to describe myself, I'm a refugee of the music business. How can we get together with tech, education, philanthropy, business, and reimagine how to invest in Black and brown neighborhoods in particular, because we are the ones most impacted by racist public policies and structural racism. So, any thoughts that you want to add to those?
Well, look, I think like you said, it takes a coalition, it takes more community, and we need to get everybody together more. You know, we need to come together either virtually until we can all get together in person and like start to connect the dots, because Tayyib, you connected Mark and I this late in life, but Mark and I didn't know each other. We're both
Which is
Philly
pretty
out
disgusting.
here. And that's true. That's true of so many people. It's like weird. And it's strange how many people in entertainment in California, in LA, are from Philly.
So
Yeah.
we're on the live stage, and I don't want to start trolling people, and I'm not going to call out any names, but there are Philadelphians who did speak to me until they saw me at some fancy retreat in Utah, or there are people that don't know that I knew them when I was a production manager working, for Eve on Saturday Night Live, right? So I may have seen you in many different environments, and you
Yeah.
never know where someone's going to be on the up or on the down. So.
Yeah.
One day maybe I'll write a tell-all book, but not for today.
I'm not writing a tell-all book, man. People be so mad at me.
I love for people to be mad at me, Mark. You know me.
I mean, I don't mind the anger. I just, look, I feel like we're at a place where, look, if yourself, Ty and myself had somebody that's smart enough to say, you know what, let's build the fund around this crew.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of progression that they would get, the talent that they would find, not just from, music, but business, tech, finance. Like, we've met people across so many different verticals. It's just about people having the value of their own as much as they do of strangers. And I feel like that's always been Philly's thing, is like, how do we embrace other people instead of embracing within? We have enough power and relationships across the world within our core group. And, even when I moved out here, I think the biggest conversation was like, Jesus, Philly is taking over the music business, because we've got people placed in so many different places. We've got Ty over here. We've got Ryan, Ryan Press over here on the publishing side with Warner Chappell. We've got, it's so loaded in various different places, but it's all about Philly recognizing, what comes from the ground of their city. Like, we race to the concrete of this city and no one pays attention until we're gone. I watched a lot of folks shun me in meetings. I spent 2 years in Philly before coming out here, because my daughter was in transition in college. That 2 years in Philly was the strangest time because, it's like, who are you? What are you? And even with the Greater Philadelphia Tourism and Marketing stuff that we did, and I'll close, the biggest thing was when I spoke about the Star on Broad Street, I asked the person, like, what exactly is the criteria for someone to get selected for the Star? And the person said, well, people typically call in, this, that, and the other. But the next thing that they said was so belittling. They said, well, what have you done?
Cool. I've been there.
And at that point, I was so stacked up in credits. And I'm just like, what have I done? I'm like, why are you here? It was at that point. It's like nepotism, right? I believe in nepotism when you're prepared to win, but I don't believe in nepotism when you're just placed in a place, because family structure or whatever, you can't do it. So it's just like, Philadelphia, we have to get a lot greater at how we build things together, but also recognize our own talent.
So I see Carolyn Spector mentioned.
Someone's talking.
I see Carolyn Spector said we should launch a fund. I see Sandra Dungy Glenn mentions that the collective actually has launched a fund. We have 17 asset management here who's hosting, who has relationships internationally with funds. I got 2 advisors here on the line. We have a ripe and fertile field of Black and brown creatives that lack investment. So all we have in our way is ourselves. We have all of the resources, all of the seeds, and we have the labor to get this done. But we need people like ourselves to speak up, to show and prove, to live truth to power. And I just want to thank you guys tremendously for the work that you've done and the work that I trust that you're going to continue to do.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like we've got momentum and we should just get back to, we should do some next steps, offline after this. But I just, in my mind, I'm putting together a list of like 20, 30 people that have been so successful who are from Philly, but not there anymore. But like, we all got to get together and come back and really like develop and invest in our community and make sure that the space is just like continually thriving. Because I still sort of sometimes imagine going back and retiring and just being there. My mom's still there. So it's like Philly will always be my hometown. And it is such a cool place. So we have to take care of it. We do.
Same here.
Yeah.
Same here. I just agree to what Ty said. I'm not even going to stretch it. It's a fact. My parents are still there, and Philly means more to me than some California, but the business of where I am means a lot to Philly and my family, because Philly gets to take the credit of anything that I do. You know what I mean? And that's the beauty of it, is that, I that lineage, is important. But I do want to be able to come back and just retire. But also, I don't want to come back and be quiet in retirement. I want to come back knowing that we have the infrastructure to help the next generation of people.
So that brings a couple thoughts. For as long as you two have known me, people have encouraged me to leave Philadelphia. When I was younger in my career, people told me I could be a more successful A&R if I moved to Brooklyn. And then most of the people I know who lived in Brooklyn got displaced when creative scene moved, and they moved to LA. And in that same time, I've been able to build an agency with Megan. I've been able to partner with my friend David Grasso on developing a co-working space. I partnered with Shift Capital to do J Central. We have 116 apartments for lease now. Just finished construction. And with Constello Realty, I got a 27,000 square foot building on 52nd Street, which is actually, to your point about commuting earlier, Ty, I used to commute from 52nd and Market to get to Cedarbrook Middle School and then eventually Cheltenham High School. So my personal journey, frankly, has been the struggle of, even as a child, knowing that I had to leave my neighborhood to get an education. So much of this work is about bringing equity and ownership to Black and Brown communities. And I just want to thank you guys for being in, as I like to say, congregation with me to make better change in our city.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Tayyib. Let's continue the conversation.
All right.
Great to
Stay
see
cool.
you, Marc.
All right, take care.
Everybody.
I'll see you guys soon.
Bye, guys.